Alright, well, our next episode is called Loud as a Whisper, and it's episode number 31, and the fifth one of the second season, and it originally aired on January 7th, 1989. It was written by Jacqueline Zambrano and directed by Larry Shaw. Now, plot-wise with this episode, the Enterprise transports one of the Federation's best peacemakers, a man named Riva, to Solari 5. Now, the warring factions there have petitioned the Enterprise and the Federation for a negotiator. And since Riva is deaf, 3 interpreters travel with him, and they sense his thoughts and express his feelings for him, which is a very unique way of negotiating. Now, shortly after the Enterprise drops into orbit around Solari 5, Riva and his interpreters beam down with Riker and Worf, and representatives from both sides slowly kind of skulk into the area where they beam down. And suddenly, one of them fires and disintegrates Riva's interpreters. And Riker and Worf grab Riva immediately and beam him back to the Enterprise. And Riva is completely distraught by this, and he feels isolated without his interpreters and grieves the loss of his friends. And since Riva knows more of a language that's through gestures, Picard has Data memorize it along with all the other different forms of gesturing types of languages. Now, even though Riva now can communicate through Data, Riva refuses to go back down to the planet, and he notes that Data cannot express his emotions, only the words. Now, in desperation, Deanna Troi asks Picard for permission to beam down to try to find a settlement, and the conflict on the planet begins to increase. But before going, Troi asks Riva for advice, and in the course of talking to her, Riva says the real secret is turning disadvantage into advantage. And Troi then asks Riva, why can't he do that? And she drives the point home until Riva decides to try to actually help the warring factions. And he beams down, and he's determined to teach his gestural language to both sides in the conflict. And while learning to talk with him, Riva hopes that they will learn to talk with each other. So a new spin on it is kind of how he decides to handle this. And that's basically the plot of this episode. And it's really an episode where Deanna Troi gets to show kind of some of her claws as she kind of digs into Riva a little bit. And Riva is, during this episode, he displays some attraction to her, and they actually have dinner one night in her quarters, which is kind of interesting. And because of that, because she attempts to learn how to communicate with him, even without some of his interpreters, she kind of earns the right to speak to Riva and to challenge him in this, and that's why Troi is able to reach him when even Picard is not. Now, Maurice Hurley thinks it was just an okay episode. He had higher expectations for it and the way it turned out, and he felt like it should have been more effective. I personally think that this was a good episode, but not necessarily a memorable one. I think if you had to list some of the best episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, this one is probably forgotten in the shuffle. That's not to say that there's anything necessarily bad about this one. I did find the special effects of the interpreters being vaporized. It looked pretty cheesy, especially nowadays. But beyond that, I don't have any huge bones to pick with it. It's just not something that's a huge story. It's really just an episode. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't stand out either. So that's really all I have to say about this particular episode. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.